Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and before you see my handsome face, I'm going to show you a few images of my apartment now that I have fully moved in. You saw my kitchen on Tuesday, so I won't show that too much, but I've got a wide-angle lens which I don't use very often, and so I'm going to use that to give you a better overview of the apartment. And unfortunately, after almost 2 solid weeks of trying to get a chest of drawers delivered, going to 2 different furniture stores, waiting for a total of 4 whole days for delivery, I still don't have one. So I've decided, okay, I don't need a chest of drawers. I'll make do with what I have. And you can see that I've got most things organized. Everything is pretty neat. I've got white everywhere, which means that it's super bright, even with the curtains closed, and super modern, but it's also a great deal of effort to keep clean. I have to mop the floors every day. I have to sweep every so often because I get fastidious. So we're going to continue talking about change in light of my change of location. And it's going to be split into 2 parts. Today I want to talk about change that happens around you and what you do about that. And then next week I'll talk about change that you make on yourself. So let's get into it. Okay, here's my actual face, and I'm using the wide-angle lens so that you can get a little bit of a shot of my semi-cluttered desk. It's about as clean as it's actually going to be. And I'm going to talk about change in the social environment and what we do about it. I'm going to start with a story. It comes from the time of Alfred the Great, the 9th century. And a scribe wrote down what a plowman told him he did during the day in plowing season. He said that he hooked up his oxen and he went to plow with a boy to help him goad the oxen, and that he plowed furrows for a day, and the day consisted of plowing 22 furrows, which is an acre. A furrow is a furrow long, which is a furlong, 220 yards, and 22 of them side by side make an acre. Now that in itself is an interesting, small fact, that at one time measurements were human, because back in the 9th century, an acre was the amount of land a plowman, a boy, and 2 oxen could plow in a day. So if you lived in an area where the soil was very light, an acre could be quite large, but if the soil was really heavy with clay, then the acre would be smaller. The acre was not a fixed size, It was the amount that a plowman and his team could plow in a day. I really like that. I like that idea as opposed to fixed scientific measurements, if you like. Now that description comes from the 9th century, but it could just as well have come from the 19th century. That's 1,000 years later. By the end of the 19th century, they were using other technologies, but certainly at the beginning of the 19th century, that was exactly the same. A plowman could plow an acre in a day with a team of oxen and a boy helping him. That's amazing that for 1,000 years, the technology of plowing, which did change, I mean, there were some improvements made, but the basic idea did not change. And then with the invention of tractors and other kinds of mechanization, things changed dramatically and society changed dramatically. Because if you can plow, let's say, 10 acres in a day with a tractor, you only need one plowman. And so 9 plowmen are out of work. And of course, that was one of the big changes in the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution changed the whole countryside and the urban environment also. At the beginning of the 19th century, roughly 80% of the population of England lived in the countryside and 20% lived in the city. And by the beginning of the 20th century, it was the complete reverse. 20% lived in the countryside and 80% lived in the city, because everybody who had been working manual labor in the countryside, forced out of work, had to move to the cities, to the factories, and that changed everything. Changed the nature of money, changed the nature of families, it changed everything. Now my initial question is, what do you do when society changes around you? You can't, for the most part, resist the change, because particularly if you're a plowman, you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. You can't say, oh no, wait a minute, I'm still going to keep plowing, because you don't have a job. You've got to move. You don't have a choice. So what are you going to do when things change around you? That's my main question. But I want to introduce an important concept. That is the difference between progress and change. Now, progress to me as a concept is a value concept. Is it progress that you have tractors rather than plows and oxen? I'm not going to say that it is or it isn't. I have my opinions about it, but it's not something I want to get into right now. But there are a lot of changes in our lives that are just changes. That's it. Last time I talked about how when I was a young boy we didn't have television. We played on the streets on the weekends as opposed to sitting at home and vegging out in front of the television. I wouldn't say that having a television and sitting on a couch all morning watching westerns as opposed to being out on the street playing with my friends is progress. It's change. It's something different. Progress is sometimes a moral issue, but certainly a value issue. And it cuts into what I'm talking about when it comes to how do you deal with change. So I'll give you another example. Back, I think it was 1983, the summer of 1983, I was debating whether to buy a personal computer. They were very expensive at that time. An IBM PC with 2 floppy drives, no hard drive, with 64K of memory on the motherboard, which with expansion slots you could get up to 640K of RAM. Cost $5,000. That's in 1980s money, so you could, practically double that, I guess, to be about 10,000 now. But you could get clones for cheaper. I could buy a Tandy 1000, which was an 8086 processor with 64K on the motherboard, add up to 640. I could get that for around $1,000, which is a lot of money, but I could afford it. But I had to decide, should I pay that, or should I continue to write the way I had been writing up to that point, which is with a yellow pad and a pencil. If I wanted to write a paper or a book, I sat down with my pad and pencil and wrote it all out, edited, scribbled, what have you. And then when it was pretty much in the shape that I needed it in, I would then get out my electric typewriter and hunt and peck with the 2 fingers, click, 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 and type it all up. It usually took me about an hour to type a page, and it was usually riddled with whiteout and errors and looked pretty awful, but I could get by with it. If I wanted a good typescript, I had to hire a typist. So that my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation, I submitted typed by myself, but when I had to submit them to the university library, I paid $1 a page to a typist to produce them, because I wasn't able to produce the kind of copy that they could produce. So I was debating, you see, if I got a Tandy 1000 with a word processor, I could improve on that whole system. But I spent the summer making my mind up, and I decided, yeah, it's worth it. It's definitely an improvement, and I've never looked back. I now touch type. I can type very fast, and I type everything on the computer. I never use paper and pencil for any of it. Now, there are some people, I've got quite a few colleagues my age, or roughly my age, who did manage to transition over to word processors. But what they would still do, is they would type up their first draft, print it out, and then go through the print version with a red pen and do all the editing, and then change everything in the computer. Well, that seems to me to be a complete and utter waste of a word processor. The whole point of a word processor is that you can do everything on the screen. You don't need to print anything out. You never need to print anything out. I've got 2 books I've published. They're actually published through Amazon, that have never been on paper at all. They're available electronically, and you can download them and read them on your own computer. As far as I'm concerned, that is an improvement. I read books on my computer now. I don't buy books. And it's an improvement because I don't want to carry books around. So I would call that progress. And I would say that my response to progress in that case, or my response to change in the form of progress, is to embrace it. But this is the point I want to make, that we have all kinds of changes around us, technological changes, social changes, environmental changes, all kinds of changes. What are we going to do about them? And my metaphor of the river, flowing river, are you swimming upstream, or are you flowing downstream, and so forth, that won't really work anymore, because we're not just talking about one river, we're talking about multiple aspects of culture, and we can't just say we're going to go with every change or we're going to resist every change. We have to be a little bit more discerning. So maybe I can salvage my metaphor of the river a tiny bit. I'll suggest that rather than there being one river which you can swim up or down or whatever, let's think about three kinds of rivers. In other words, let's talk about change as having three different possibilities. There's change that is progress, a discernible progress. Things are better. I think my word processor is mountains better than typing up after yellow pads and pencil. No question. That is progress as far as I'm concerned. Or we could just say an improvement. If you don't want to use the word progress, just say it's definitely an improvement. That's river number one. River number two is change that is just change. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. Now, an awful lot of the changes in Microsoft software is just change that is not an improvement, just different. I've been through multiple word processors. Microsoft Word is the one I typically use, and it keeps changing all the time. As far as I'm concerned, the changes are neither here nor there. The big change, the change from yellow pad to word processor, that was an improvement. Also, the change from WordStar, which was the DOS word processor, to Microsoft Word was also an improvement. But the various iterations of Microsoft Word that come out all the time, I use Microsoft Word 365 now, which updates, I don't know, every month. It doesn't matter to me. That's just change. I don't need all the bells and whistles of the next generation. So that's change for change's sake. I don't exactly embrace it. I don't exactly go against it. Then there's the third kind of change, which is devolution. The change where things get worse. And there are a lot of things in the world that are of this nature. So those are our three rivers. Improvement, change, devolution. First thing I advocate is that you have to be discerning. You have to figure out whether a change is an improvement, simply a change for change's sake, or a devolution. In other words, you've got to be proactive. You can't just decide, I'm going to embrace every change that comes along, or I'm going to resist every change that comes along. You're going to have to decide, whether the change is an improvement, a devolution, or simply a change. In other words, what I'm advocating is that you have to use your brain. I'm sorry to break it to you, but that's my ultimate message, is that you have to evaluate change as it comes. Now, one of the changes that I thought was really quite intriguing was Facebook. Now, I have quite a number of social media applications, including Instagram and Facebook, and I used to use others, which are now more or less defunct. I do use Facebook a lot. And you'll see a lot of people on Facebook or on YouTube saying, social media are bad, let's get off them, don't waste your time, don't get up in the morning and check your Facebook, go out and meet people, blah, 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 blah. Well, here I think generalization is not very useful. It's not a matter of saying that social media are all good or are all bad, and you'll notice I'm using media in the plural because it is a plural noun, it's a Latin noun, the singular is medium. So Facebook is one social medium, Instagram is another social medium, and together they are social media, plural. There are language changes which I deeply resist when they confuse issues. And that one's a minor one, but there are some much greater sins, like, for example, when people use beg the question to mean raise a question, which it doesn't mean at all. Beg the question is a logical fallacy, and I'm not going to go into that, but when people use that wrongly, I get really annoyed, because some changes in language are devolution. They are confusing meaning, and that's not a good thing. Some changes in language are just changes, and some changes are improvements. So our first step is to decide whether a change is something that improves our lives personally or not. Now, in my case, social media have improved my life in one arena only. I've got several of them on my smartphone. Don't use my smartphone much at all. I use it now and again when I'm in a strange place and I don't know where I am, because I'm not very good at orienting myself, and the GPS is just marvelous because it helps me find out where I am when I'm lost. I use Facebook to connect with people all over the world. I've got friends in Africa, in North America, South America, Asia, Australia, all over the place. I would never be able to be in contact with them. I'd never know what's going on with them if it weren't for Facebook. But with Facebook, I can be in touch with them quite often, and I can know what's going on with them, and I really like that. But the point is, that's how I use Facebook. Other people use Facebook in completely different ways. I've got people who used to be my friends on Facebook who, in fact, are not my friends anymore because I don't like what they do with it. They use it to just repost things that other people have posted, or news stories or whatever, and my feed is just filled up with these things that I'm not interested in. And if people do that endlessly, they never tell me what's going on with them. They're always just reposting these news stories or political issues or something like that.
I can look at those things for myself. If I need to know what's going on politically, I have ways of finding that stuff out. I don't need my Facebook friends to be pointing it out to me, and I don't need people telling me what their political opinions are. I'm not interested in other people's political opinions. So if people use Facebook for that, then I just eliminate them. But if they tell me what's going on with their family, what's going on if they live in, let's say in Australia, and the brush fires are all around them and they can tell me that they're safe, that's all good. So in the case of social media, I would say a lot depends on how you actually use it. You can't just say social media are an improvement or they're a change or a devolution. It's a question of how you deal with them. So what I'm getting at in this video is that how you act when things change has a lot to do with who you are and how you think about the world around you. But certainly we can divide change into those three streams, and then we can decide what are we going to do. Generally speaking, my attitude is that if something is an improvement in my life, then I will embrace it if I can afford it. I mean, there are things that would improve my photography immensely if I could afford them, but I can't. There are lenses that are wonderful that I can't afford. But I have embraced digital photography, no question. Great improvement over film for me. Not overall. There are things that film can do that digital photography cannot do. But for me, digital photography is a huge improvement because I can see what I've taken a photograph of immediately, and I don't have to wait until it's developed and so forth. All of that, for me, is an improvement. There are an awful lot of things in my life that are changes that are just changes. I would say, generally speaking, that this apartment is not so much an improvement as a difference. I mean, there are some things that I like about it better than the old apartment, but the old apartment was better in some other ways too. I mean, it's swings and roundabouts, as we say. So that kind of change, you just have to decide whether you want to go with it or not. And then there's the devolutionary kind of change, which, in my humble opinion, we have to just constantly resist. Now, the crux of the matter is deciding what is devolutionary. And unfortunately, we don't always know until after the event. That's the big problem with devolutionary change. We can look back and say, that was a mistake. So we do need to always be alert to change and which of the three streams that change belongs to. So I'm going to continue this for at least another week, probably two, and meanwhile tell your friends about this channel, like and subscribe, and we'll have more cooking on Tuesday. Bye.